At this seminar, with the Indigenous Terra Madre Network, we discuss Indigenous people as custodians to sustainable food systems. Traditional knowledge on agricultural food systems and food productions is extremely important for our own food security and food sovereignty. I hope you enjoy the discussions at the Indigenous Terra Madre Network.
So what we do is we're trying to get little bits and pieces from the remaining elders that are there with us on what our traditional ways of doing things are, growing our own food, making our own gardens and all that. And we've been doing that for some years now. We've asked the elders from the communities to come into schools to teach our children. Even though it's not in the government program, we want our children to learn what it belongs to us. So we asked the elders to come into the schools to teach our children on traditional methods of making gardens, cutting canoes, making houses, feeding animals. So those are the sort of things that we're going through now. We include, as I mentioned earlier on, we include elders to be part of this program. Now I have with me here is an elder who's teaching some people in our communities to go to our traditional methods of gardening, because one of the main issues that is affecting us in the region is this climate change, and because we come from little islands, the ocean is rising up and it's chasing us further inland, so we have to change our way of making gardens, producing our own food. And with that, one of the main methods that we use, our traditional method that we use, is irrigation. And irrigation gardening is, it can sustain us for quite a number of years, say for 6 or 7 years. So I'm providing you some experience on the ground on what we're doing. And we're proud of doing this because our children are also part of the whole program. The elders teach them the traditional songs, the way, everything is spiritual. When the kids, there are certain things that you have to do before you go to your gardens. There's certain things you have to do before you plant. And these things the kids have to go through to learn before they can go and do their own. And they do this on practical basis. So that's what we're doing from where I come from.
842 million people are malnourished. And this is after we have used as much resources as we could. And if all of us around the world were to live the same standards as Europe and North America, we would require 2 planets of the size of the Earth to be able to sustain. Obviously, this is not a sustainable approach. Today, we are using 12 calories of energy to produce 1 calorie of food. And therefore, it's no longer business as usual. And the interesting thing is that the world has suddenly started to heed to some of the sustainable approaches that indigenous communities have followed around the world. And if there are any lessons that we have to learn from them, you must remember 3 principles that are crucial. One is that the issues of the rights of indigenous peoples, that these rights are very much part and parcel of the human rights that we have. The second is that indigenous peoples, like everyone else, wants to live better, but wants to live, that well-being is to be defined according to their ways. And third, that any aspect that you're looking to do has to look at both the individual and the collective rights. One is the principle of harmony. Second, the principles of balance. Third, the principles of complementarity. Fourth, the intercultural independence. And fifth, the issue of intergeneration. Whichever community you go through, these are the few principles that are most essential, and that forms the common ground of all indigenous communities. And therefore, he said that local food systems are based on the acknowledgement and the practice of these principles. When these principles are not being practiced, that's when you lead to a breakdown of your local systems.
When we discuss about local food and economies for sustainable development, I would like for all of you to remember that as indigenous peoples, we have been struggling for two things in the last years. The recognition of our rights, indigenous rights, human rights. Some governments still doesn't recognize that indigenous rights are human rights, but we have been struggling for that. And when people ask, why are you struggling for your rights? We say, because we want to live better. So development, from the point of view of indigenous peoples, is the main reason why we have been struggling for the recognition of our individual and collective rights. But for indigenous peoples, the concept of development is different from the mainstream concept of development. For my community, we speak about Laman Laka. In the Andean communities, they talk about buen vivir. Each indigenous nation has a different word that means development. And the main characteristic of development for indigenous peoples are, in the first place, that we consider that everything has life, not only the human beings, the animals, the plants, the rocks, the stars, the sun, everything have life. And because everything have life, we have to live in harmony, and we are not the only ones that decide how these elements should be related. So harmony, balance is the center of our concept of development. Of course, intercultural relation, because we believe culture is an important pillar for development. And if we do not respect each one of the culture, it is very difficult for us to relate with the other human beings. If you accept my culture, you accept the different elements of my culture, you will begin to respect me, and I will also respect you. And that is what the basis of building intercultural relation. And of course, intergenerational relation. For an indigenous community, we, the ones that are living in the community, are not the only members of our ancestors are also members, but the next generations are also members of our community. So that intergenerational relation is very important, because the things that we are deciding today will impact on the next 7 generations. So when we discuss about local food and economies, they are based on these principles. We just went through in the last 4 years the preparation of the first World Conference on Indigenous Peoples at the UN. And we held in the last 3 years 7 preparatory meetings in the 7 sociocultural regions of the world, and we had a meeting where we all got together and defined our priorities. And we share the same 4 priorities: land, rights, territories, control over natural resources is something common in all regions of the world. The gaps between our rights that are recognized and the way in which they're exercised in each country is something that we face in all regions of the world. The lack of respect of our concept of development and the imposition of a different concept of development is common in all regions of the world. The lack of respect of free, prior, and informed consent, everyone decides over our territories without our permission, is something common. The violence against indigenous women and children, common. So I would say that we have learned a lesson. We respect diversity, and we are an expression that diversity is something that is very important But if we have one voice, united at the global level, it is possible to begin to change the situation in which we are as indigenous peoples.